That pile of skids, that's the skids that we get from work. When they start out, these skids are 40 inches in length, 28 inches in width. We just run down the side with a skill saw just inside of where the nails are along here and just cut them off, come back and take the scraps of wood off and pull all the nails out. So we've used that for a lot of stuff. We're going to start another project, and it's going to require me to plane a bunch of these 2x4s down. You can see over there next to the toolbox. Those are from skids I'd already taken apart before. It's going to be a lot of noise, and it's going to take time to get them all planed down. I'm not going to do all of them, but I'll have to do a number of them for the projects that we're going to start. So we'll do that, and when I get that done, then we'll come back to the video. Okay, so we planed down our wood. We ended up with 1.5 inches thickness by the time we were done planing it. So then we set up the saw, I moved the rip fence over, and I put a piece of scrap wood in with a nice straight edge up very close to the blade. Ran one side of the wood through just to clean off the side of it. Then we removed all of that. We put the fence out to 1.5 inches. So we ended up with 1.5 inch square lumber when we were done. Now we want to do a lap joint to join two of these together. So we're going to remove some material through half the thickness of the wood on each piece, overlap them, glue them, and clamp them together, and that'll give us pieces long enough to put this plant stand together. Now to do that, I need to remove all the guards on the saw. Our guards are out of the way. Now we need to get this blade set for 3/4 inch depth. That'll be halfway through the thickness of our boards. So we just got a scrap piece of wood. We'll run that through it and we'll measure the depth of the cut and see if we're there. We're a little bit below 3/4, so we'll bring that blade up just a bit. Okay. So as I said, we'll remove probably, if we remove 5 inches, 75, we'll end up with our 6 feet that we want when we're finished. So we'll take 5 inches off length of the wood, 3/4 inch deep, and then we'll be able to glue those together and have a 6 foot long straight piece of wood. So I think when we left off, we were going to plane some wood down and then cut it into a lap joint on the table saw, glue it together to get our longer pieces of wood that we needed. So we completed that. This is one of the pieces of wood. We move over to this side. So I don't know how well this shows up. So our lap joint comes up along here. We need to put a little bit of wood filler in yet where these, you can see the joint in there. They're fairly tight, but not completely tight. So we'll fill those in, sand them off. The original plant stand, it's tilted back away from you, but it also tilts in and gets narrower at the top. So we have a combination angle on the bottom of this leg. So using the standard rule of thumb, if you were placing a ladder up against a wall, and I just mocked this up to help me figure out my angles. So this being the floor or ground surface and this being the wall of your house, and you're going to put a ladder up, for every 4 feet in height, you go 1 foot out. So we're not doing this to scale, so we've reduced it by 25%. So this mark is 1 foot in height, and this pen mark across here is 3 inches out. So you're 25% of the 4-to-1 rule. So in putting a ladder on there and leaning it back against the wall, you end up with a 15-degree angle on the bottom of this wood and a 165-degree angle on this end of the wood. and that keeps you flat, solid surfaces. Now we had to figure out the tilt that this thing's going to lean on also, so it gets narrower as you go up. And for that, we changed the spacing of the shelves from 12 inches to 14-inch spacing between each shelf, and we wanted the overall height of this to be somewhere around 6 feet. So we figured out that we need 3 1/4 inches closer together on each shelf as you go up. And that ended up working out. Again, if I use this as my straight edge, if that's where my piece of wood is, from this straight edge to where the edge of the wood is, that's 1 5/8 inches on each side. So it gives me my 3/4 inch overall per shelf going up. And it worked out starting with a 24-inch wide base and doing 6 shelves up. I end up with 7 3/4 inch at the top. She had 8 inches on her diagram, so I'm happy that that's close enough. So our next step we need to do now, I'm going to tear that pile of skids apart that I had brought home, and we're going to plane all of those boards down because I decided I am going to use those boards to make the shelves out of. So the legs and the shelves will all be the same lumber. I don't know if she wants this painted or stained yet, but I'm going to use all the same lumber. So if we do stain it, it's all going to come out to be the same color. So I've got some more work to do now, more noisy equipment to run. So we'll stop the video there. I'll get a bunch more work done and we'll come back. Okay, so we're back. We stopped to take skids apart, planed some wood down, and we stopped filming while we did that because of the noise. So you can imagine if this was a skid, your 2 2x4s and your boards would be running across the skid. So I have an old skill saw that's got a blade that's pretty beat up in there because it's hit nails and stuff before doing this. So you run the skill saw down to cut the boards, and you'll cut into the 2x4s a little bit and rough them up. It doesn't matter. If you're going to plane the stuff down and use it anyhow, you're going to get rid of all of that. I'll come back later and I'll knock off the scrap wood, pull all the nails, and then if I need some 2x4s for something that I'm going to build or for any other purpose, I have lots of 2x4s. I'm a little congested here right now. I've tried to bring everything in close. I did this walking around with the camera and it was too shaky. So I've put the camera on the tripod and I've just tried to bring everything in closer that I can show you. So that was it for the skids. If you're using old skids to build anything, be sure to get all of your nails or staples or anything like that out of them before running them through your tools. I actually bought a piece of lumber once from a hardware store and they had a price tag stapled to the end of the board, and I didn't see that staple, and I ran it through the planer to reduce the thickness of the wood, and I caught that tiny staple that was in there, and it was enough to put a chip in the blade. So it doesn't take much at all when you're cutting wood. If there's a little piece of metal in there, you can make a mess of a blade in a hurry. The chop saw or miter saw that we used for this project, we talked about the angle for leaning back and tilting inward as the frame comes together closer at the top. That same angle gets transferred up the leg to where the shelves are going to be, so that when the legs are in their position, the shelves are actually level the way you need them to be to put anything on them. So we transferred that same angle to the locations where we wanted our shelving. We've done all of the cuts for those for the shelves to sit in. I only wanted to cut halfway through the depth of the wood for the shelf to sit in. Now, my miter saw doesn't have any sort of a feature that lets you stop the blade at any particular point. It's made to cut right through. So I got a scrap piece of wood and a couple of shims to put under it to get the height I wanted, clamped it on there, so when you bring it down, the motor hits that and stops, and that gives me half of the depth that I needed through my legs for the shelves. Now the edges of these are extremely sharp. When you plane both sides and you get a really nice square edge, it's a very sharp edge. Whether you're going to paint them, stain them, varathane them, whatever, it'll wear off on that edge really fast. So we've picked out a 1/4 inch round over bit that we've set up in our router, and I'll move the table saw out of the way for a minute and bring the router over and maybe we can see that. And it'll just give that a nice smooth profile and round it over. So finishes aren't going to wear off. It's not going to be sharp if you have any little kids that run their hand down the edge of this thing, because it is quite sharp. So there's my cheap router table that I have, but it does the job. Someday maybe we'll get a better one for it. So we've got our 1/4 inch round over bit set up, and I just ran a scrap of wood through. And I don't know if you can see just how it rounds over the edge on that profile or not. But that'll work out nicely when we run the legs through that. One of the tools that's really handy to have is this guy. I think they call this a T-bevel square, I think. So when it's put away, when it's stored, it's just that. But you can, once you get your angle set, so when I did the angle on the bottom of these legs, at 15 degrees for them leaning back. So you'd set that at wherever your 15 degrees is, run that up the side of your wood, and then you can just easily transfer your angles or dimensions or whatever, wherever you need them to be. There's a shelf I wanted to show you. After we plane the wood and you could see the color and the texture of the grain and stuff in it, then you could select out the pieces you wanted to use for the shelving. And I have one here. This is the bottom shelf, the 24-inch wide one. But you can see how the coloring and stuff is in the wood. And I think that's going to turn out really nice when we get some stain and varathane on there. It'll make that grain just stand right up. You'll really notice it. We have to do. So none of this is glued or anything. It's just sitting here together right now, just to try to show you what it's going to look like. Yeah, so we've got some router work to do, a little bit of fine sanding to do, and we'll get this thing put together. Okay, so we have our plant stand completely assembled. I left it way back here just to try and get the whole thing into the lens of the camera there, so you can see the height of it. Like I said, we're just a couple of inches above the 6-foot mark. We'll bring it closer now that you've seen it. Now the only thing I would change if I did this again, I would make this top shelf longer. Instead of 6 inches wide like all of them, I would bring it back to 7.5. That would give me somewhere to put the top of this back leg. So when you wanted to store it, it would fold up flat behind the shelves. Because it's on the same width of shelf as all of the rest, and it's inside, as soon as it hits this next shelf down, we're still out about 8 inches at the bottom. But that takes up a lot less room for storage if it needs to be than if the leg was attached permanently in that position. You did need a lot more room. So, that's good. Stain, we need to figure out the color of this. She wants it stained. I have to cut off scraps from my shelves, so when it comes time to do the staining, you can play around with it and try and match something up. This one is called a Colonial American, and it's kind of a medium brown. It's not a light brown, it's not really dark. Makes the grain show up very nice. It's a really nice stain, but it's got no red tint to it at all. And we have one that they actually do call a cherry stain, although I have no idea why, because if we compare the two, it's just a light brown, and you can see the two side by side how much lighter it is than the Colonial American stain over there on that side. And we have a third one here. It's called Red Chestnut. And again, compared to that medium brown, you can see the red color in this one. So I think these two are the two we're going to play around with trying to mix together. And I'm not going to mix them in the cans. what I'll do is I'll let those ones dry, and then I'll go over top of this brown one here, maybe with one coat of the red color right over top of it. See what that gives us. Maybe it'll take 2 coats of the red one to bring it up to enough tint. There was another one, a fourth one, and I'm going to buy another can of this because I really believe I'm going to end up using this in some way. This one is a stain and a polyurethane combined, and it's dried up. There was very little left in this can of what there was dried. And it's called a Bombay Mahogany. I've used this a number of times. I can't find the same color in just a stain. I can only find it in the one that has the polyurethane mixed in it. But it's a really nice color. And even if you wanted to mix other stains with it, I've still been successful putting this on last. So put on a base coat of just a stain like this, and then brush this over top of it, and you still get a different effect of color. So I'm going to buy another can of this because I really think I'm going to end up needing this, just because I know that the red color in here is much closer than anything I'm starting with already for what we want to achieve. So there it is. It's all together. I'll get the stain coloring figured out, and I'll stain it. I'm going to varathane it, and the next time you see it, it'll be finished and ready to put to use. So we've got our plant stand finished off. This is the finished product now. We come up with the colors that we wanted. It actually took 3 coats of stain. We kept playing around on our cut off scraps of the same material that we built the shelves out of, so that we were getting a realistic color of this wood. It was a kind of a medium brown. I think I showed you the cans of stains that we were involved with. I ended up buying one more. The one I had mentioned was Colonial American. That was actually the French side of the can. When I turned it around to the American, or the English side, it was Early American is what it was called. So we did a coat of that on it first. Then I did a coat of the one that was called Red Chestnut. Then I went and I bought another one called Sedona Red. And I did that as the 3rd coat. And now we've got the clear varathane over top of that, and it's ready to put to use. I said I was going to do a measured drawing of this, and I'll show you that. I did all of that, so if I do one of these again in the future, I won't have to go through all of the calculations. So we did, I don't know if that shows up, we did a front view, a side view, we did a 3D view of it. I made some notes for cutting and lengths and angles and things here, and noted what I used for the finish on it. And then I also did a conversion chart of the measurements. I'm old school and work with, inches and 1/4 inches and 5/8 and that kind of stuff. But if my son ever wants to take up the woodworking, he's a newer generation, he's going to be all metric. So I've converted it all over to millimeters also. So in the future, if he wants to do one and use his metric measurements, he can do so. So again, I think it turned out very well. Thank you for watching.